Seahawks fans, wherever you may be, welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstead, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstead, here with Keith Myers, and we're talking training camp this week. Keith, we made it. We finally made it to training camp. I can't even believe it. It's just been one heck of an off season so far.
It's been what feels like the longest off season in a very, very long time. Mainly just because
I don't think there's anything to compare even.
There hasn't been, the mini camps and all of that kind of stuff. And so we've been in that like no football news zone for much longer than we've ever had to deal with it before. And I think that's the big problem.
If anybody's looking for good news, we got it. We got a lot to talk about today, and a lot of it is brand new news, fresh out of the gate, ready to go. And since the last time we recorded, in fact, I was on texting you this weekend about the show a little bit, what we're going to do, how we're going to set it up, and I said I probably have like 40 minutes of content, and you were like, don't worry about it. I think that problem will solve itself by the time we get it on. And sure enough,
what happened? Yep, yeah. I was like, there will be news. We will need to discuss it. I'm sure there will be other stuff that's there. And
go to bed and don't worry about it. Yeah.
The universe agreed and made sure that happened for us. So here we are.
All right. So in today's show, we're going to talk about training camp. Our main lead is that we're going to have 5 storylines that we're going to talk about. Keith and I have come up with our own, and that we're going to watch during training camp. We expect to unfold. We're going to talk about the NFL and the NFL Players Association agreement on COVID-19 and what that means as we move forward through this process. We're going to talk roster cuts, initial roster cuts. We're going to talk exemption lists. We're going to find out what that exactly means. And then we're going to talk about a big, huge blockbuster deal that the Seahawks made. But before we get into that, we just kind of wanted to get started on the first part of the show before we get to the storylines, Keith. This has just been a huge, very long, drawn-out process of an off-season that started in late January, early February. How has the team changed since then? What did free agency do? How did COVID-19 impact it? The run up to the draft, our draft picks, no off-season workouts and mini camps like you just mentioned. So no first look at any players, no evaluations whatsoever. So far, every other year that we've covered this, and for the entire time the Seahawks have been in existence, we've had a chance through media reports and so forth to get looks at players, mini camps, what veterans are looking like, the status of everybody, how things kind of coalesce. There's just been really none of that, so it's been extremely difficult even to have a show. I mean, we've just kind of been going along on virtually no information for months now, which is really an interesting way to go about doing a Seahawks podcast.
Yeah, it's been a weird off season. It's been a weird year to try and put out a weekly podcast and never miss a show like we do, because there just hasn't been football content like there normally is, and it makes for a challenging job for us to have what we believe is a good, meaningful, entertaining show for everyone. So, but not surprisingly, we've done it. We've made it through. We've got through everything, and I think we've done a great job with the shows that we've put together.
I do too. I mean, as far as the content goes, I think that we've been we've been really consistent, and hopefully everyone's enjoyed it up till this point. But now it really starts. I mean, today is actually the official day that players start to come in. I wanted to get into the NFL Players Association agreement on preseason and the league year, only because I think it sets up everything that we're going to talk about probably for the entire season, given the circumstances on the ground with this thing. But training camp officially starts July 28th. Here we are. Players can start coming in. The big thing, though, is that players can start to arrive in their home cities, but they need to go through a testing protocol before they're allowed into the building and into practice sessions and so forth. So they have to have 3 negative tests 2 days in a row. So today will be a first test, tomorrow, and then they skip a day, and then the next day they have a test, and then the day after that they can start to come into the building and so forth. So the 5 days until after they arrive, before players can start being in meetings, can do walkthroughs on the field, all that kind of stuff. So while training camp does officially start today, it's really going to be a little while before we actually have any news, unless we hear of positive COVID-19 tests. I'm sure that we will. Hopefully it doesn't impact the Seahawks terribly, but if you're going to get COVID-19, earlier the better in the way that this thing is set up, because you're going to have to go through a quarantine protocol. You're going to have to obviously get through that illness and then get better and come back and be cleared and all that kind of stuff. So,
well, the NFL, when they were talking about their process and everything that they've come together with, and they said that they expect positive tests. And given the state of the country right now, with cases surging pretty much everywhere at this point, they said it would be wrong to not expect that. So, but they believe that they have, between all the contact tracing they're doing, all the testing they're doing, that they're going to be able to catch the positive cases really quickly, get those people into quarantine and away from everyone else, so that it doesn't become a big thing where a bunch of people get it.
And the key is the quick turnaround on the tests. Yeah. I mean, if they can have a same day analysis on those things, that would be awesome. Let's talk about some of the protocols that they've got to minimize the risks in place. The agreed deal includes a 16-man practice squad. That's one of the most impactful things on this agreement, I thought, for teams to be able to kind of get through these things, is to have additional players available on the practice squad. We'll see how that plays out. One thing that it did do initially too was go down to from a 90-man roster initially to an 80-man roster. I think teams had the choice of going through August 15th or so with 90-man, but they had to split the squad, or they go through to an 80-man right away, and then they can take those and split them into 4 separate groups of 20. I think going through as well, and actually be able to keep the team together. 0 preseason games. Yep. NFL canceled preseason. That was expected. I don't know that is necessarily an indication of them canceling regular season games. I think it was just specifically negotiated into the deal just for player safety. Now, they could cancel games one at a time, a block of 4 games or whatever the league feels like it's necessary going forward, but initially no preseason games. Opt-out clauses. We're starting to see what this actually means now. Players are opting out. In fact, I think today or yesterday was the last day that players could opt out. That did impact the Seahawks. Mm-hmm. Chance Warmack, who was a guard trying to make the team, hadn't been in the league for a year, had actually a decent opportunity to stick. Opted out of 2020. His family was impacted by COVID-19 earlier in the year, and he's not going to take that chance. And so he's opted out of 2020. The players, high-risk players, receive $350,000 if they opt out and their contract tolls. And then voluntary opt-out players, such as Chance Warmack, receive $150,000 for not playing. and their contract. Also told us he was on a 1-year deal, so he's going to have to look for a new team next year if he wants to come back. Ramp up period for preseason, Keith. I want to talk about this just for a minute. They got 20 days of non-contact workouts initially. So from today for 20 more days, there's literally going to be no pads, no contact. And then 14 days, not no pads, just no contact. 14 days from now, though, they'll have padded practices, so helmets and pads, but no contact. So this is just crazy.
Well, when you don't have a preseason, I mean, because you got to remember that training camp would go until, usually it's I'm trying to think if it's after the first or the second.
Yeah, it's like 3 weeks of training camp.
Yeah. And so I think they get through the first preseason game, come back, do another week of training camp, and then they break camp.
Yes.
And then it's just, normal practices and whatever while they get, 3 more weeks of the preseason, but that's not really training camp. This year, so you've got the extra 3 weeks of prep time between the start of camp and the first game. And so they're like, okay, let's bring this along a little slower and have it be, 20 days of non-padded, non-contact practice. Basically what this is trying to make up for all of the mini camps that were missed, all of the those kind of team activities where those are all non-contact, non-pads, but you get a chance to teach and that kind of stuff and get all the players up to speed on the scheme and the playbook and everything. And so that's what this first basically 3 weeks is going to be. It's going to be all of the off-season program condensed into that. And then,
and you really think about it too, that the regular season doesn't start until the 13th of September. So you're literally in this mode for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So this is seems drawn out early on, but eventually those guys are going to get really tired of going against each other and going to definitely want to hit another team at some point.
The length of training camp where it's, a little over 2 weeks and then they have the first preseason game. That first preseason game, what you hear out of every player is, oh my God, it's finally it felt so good to just, get geared up and go hit an opponent and actually play what feels like football and like they are ready for it to be about playing another team after 2.5 weeks. This is going to be 6 weeks of this. They're going to be dying to play a game.
Yeah. There's going to be some fights.
Expect fights. There's going to be lots of fights. That's that is true as well.
One last piece that I want to talk about before we move on is the cap. So the revenue cap impact for 2020 is unchanged. So $198.2 million. That remains. But any losses that are seen this year or into the future, they've agreed to spread over 4 years. And we talked about that initially when we tried to figure out how they're going to deal with this. That was kind of our idea as well as to how they could smooth this thing out to lessen the impact of player movements and contracts and so forth. They do have a minimum cap established though of $175 million. And then teams can still roll over money as well.
That to me, that the floor was the most important part of this, because what that does from a competitive balance point of view is if they end up having to cancel games, right, that's a huge dip in revenue. And by the rules of the old CBA and the way the salary cap was set before, that big drop of revenue means a big drop of available cap space next year. And so you'll be having these teams that are, they thought they had planned ahead and they've got, 20 million of cap room, and now they're 15 million over the cap because the cap dropped by that much. And you've got this floor. They can plan on it. They kind of will be able to see it coming, because the way that you're going to see revenue drop significantly is mostly through canceled games. That's going to be the part that really hurts. And, if they end up having to cancel a game here or there, or that kind of thing, or if they end up losing a block of 4 because there's, the number of cases in the league just jumped too high and they had to get it under control. Then we were talking, block of 4, that's almost a quarter of their revenue. Well, it's not, because the playoffs actually make up a huge chunk of the revenue. But okay, let's call it 20%. That would be 20% of the cap, right? That's $40 million. That's a lot of cap room that every team just
The league
lost.
does anticipate signing a new TV deal very soon, next year, I believe. And so that could help with that. Also, teams can roll over. So Seattle has currently roughly, let's just say, $15 million in cap. They could roll it out into next year rather than making any more moves. And that would help with that floor to help them retain players as well.
Yeah, but they also have $15 million in cap, and Clowney's still out there. They could go get him, or they desperately need a defensive tackle in the middle, not like someone who's going to start and whatever, but a key rotational guy like Al Woods was last year. This is a team that needs to acquire, and they should probably use that cap space to do so, because they just went out and made a huge win now move, and to not actually try and win now by filling those holes would be ill-advised.
Let's talk about the roster. Let's talk about the big move. And what a big move it was, Keith. It was the biggest move of the offseason in the entire NFL.
Absolutely.
If you don't count the DeAndre Hopkins trade. Now, the DeAndre Hopkins trade was definitely blockbuster, but the compensation was really wonkish there, and it just felt kind of weird. This one was truly blockbuster in that both sides gave up massive compensation. So the New York Jets sent safety Jamal Adams, to the Seahawks in exchange for Bradley McDougald. The Jets sent a 4th rounder as well. So in exchange for Bradley McDougald, a 2021 first-round pick, and a 2021 third-round pick, as well as a 2022 first-round pick. So 2 firsts and a swap of a 3rd and 4th, plus Bradley McDougald for all-pro safety Jamal Adams. Keith, instant reaction.
Instant reaction was, wow, that's a lot of compensation. There better be a long-term extension tacked onto the end of there. Adams, okay, you have to look at this in a couple different ways. From a football standpoint, this move makes a lot of sense in that you get probably one of the best he's an all-pro at strong safety. He's probably the best strong safety in the game right now. But he's more than that, because he's more than that, because he actually covered in the slot more last year than he did actually play his position at strong safety. He
covered more in the slot than we actually used a slot corner.
Yeah. He is probably the best coverage strong safety in the NFL, period. Like, that hard stop. Like, there's no but
that is very true.
On that. And so you throw that in there, and his ability to shut down, the best tight ends and running backs and, whatever he's being asked to do, or, cover a slot receiver and shut that down, especially with the teams that have the big slot type of guy, that those players, he can negate them completely from a game plan. And those kind of, getting a guy like him changes a defense. It is absolutely a huge, just amazing acquisition from a football standpoint. I mean, yes, they sent Bradley McDougald, but basically when you got Adams to the safety room, McDougald wasn't going to play. And so he was going to get cut for salary cap reasons anyway, because you've got your 2 starters, you've got your all-purpose backup in Marquis Blair, and all of a sudden McDougald's cap number makes no sense to have on the bench as the 4th safety. And so he was going to get cut anyway, so I don't really consider him part of the package. It's just the other team needed a safety, and they were going to cut him, so they just threw him in. But 2 first-round picks and a third, and it's all next. The first and third are next year. So if they traded away these future picks to try and win right now, and that can be devastating long term. Because if he
on a number of levels,
if he walks or ends up not coming back, not re-signing, all that kind of stuff, you go into this next year, 2021, without Adams and without a first and a third round pick.
That can't happen. And one way or another, we'd either get the picks back somehow, some way, or he's going to get signed. I mean, there's no way that he's going to walk out without compensation.
No. Yeah, when they did this trade, I know that they are, because there are deadlines in place for signing franchise players and that kind of stuff, and we're well past that. And so there's a date sometime, I think in November, where they're not allowed to negotiate and sign a long-term deal with a player that I guess he wasn't on a franchise tag. He's on the last year of his rookie deal.
He's actually got 2 more years, Keith. So he's got 2 more years on his deal, including the 5th year option. So this is his 4th season.
Okay.
2021 is the 5th year option. They're going to pay him $10 million in 2021, which will be his last year, and then they can extend him. There's also a franchise tag in place if it needed to.
In my head, I was thinking
they could use 2 franchise tags. Yep. It would be 4 years. We've got team control.
In my head, I was thinking, this was his last year, and then they're going into the franchise tag situation. And so, but yeah, I forgot about the 5th year option. So that actually does change things a little bit. And that you look at that and you go, okay, they're trading for a player that they have 3 years of team control with. And he's such an elite player that even the franchise tag number is palatable.
Less expensive than what they would have to pay him on an extension. I can guarantee it.
Maybe. And so he's such an elite, because you look at, okay, the top 5 safety contracts out there, and you go, would you pay him that? The average of the top 5, and you're like, yeah, absolutely. So that really gives them 3 years of team control, and hopefully an extension beyond that. And so with that in mind, this becomes more palatable from a business standpoint, but it's still a huge investment in one guy, when a super awesome impact player is still sitting there in Jadeveon Clowney and could have been signed without giving up all the future compensation. So if you're just looking for impact, sure, but I don't think this was just about getting an impact player. I think this was about getting a tone setter. This was about getting a foundational piece for your defense. Yeah, and this was, he is Earl Thomas in terms of his coverage abilities, but he plays Cam Chancellor's position and hits hard the way you'd expect a strong safety to. He's kind of got that intimidator level. He's an alpha. If you were going to recreate the Legion of Boom, this might be where you'd have to start. Of all the players, all the safeties in the league, he would probably be the ideal one to start that with. And I think that is where Pete Carroll's coming from. And he's like, we were at our best when our safeties were the best in the league, because the scheme is built around certain characteristics that require great safety play in order to work. And we saw last year what happened when we didn't have great safety play, right? The cover 3 is not some great scheme that just negates opposing coverage. It has some holes in it, and that's the reason why more teams don't use it. You've got to have good safety play in order to make it work right, and they didn't have it last year. McDougald is good. He's above average, but he's not great. And Tedrick Thompson was terrible. And you put those together, and the defense was bad. It was just genuinely bad. And so they traded for Quandre Diggs. They've traded for Jamal Adams. They fixed the safety play problem. so that now they can go back to doing what they do on defense and negate those holes that the cover 3 naturally has. I mean, every defense has natural holes. This isn't like, I'm not like, saying crap about the cover 3. The cover 2 has major holes. The playing cover a high safety cover 1 man under has major holes. So there's always issues. No matter what the scheme is, offenses know how to attack it. But the Seattle specific schemes, based mostly off cover 3, has specific holes. But you can negate it when you have elite safety play. The Seahawks did that for years with Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor. They haven't been able to recreate that. Now they just put the pieces in place to recreate that.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. So when I found out about this, I didn't really care about the compensation. We'll work through the compensation. We'll figure that out. It is what it is. It's steep. It's something that makes you a little uncomfortable, especially when you're pushing that forward so much, and it takes away some of the favorite tools that John Schneider has in drafts to use to move back in drafts and so forth and pick up additional picks. We'll have to see how that works out. They can usually recoup picks pretty decently, but he's not going to be able to recoup first-round picks unless they trade away another player. And I don't see that happening right now with this roster. I like the trade. I mean, this is huge for this franchise because I think Jamal Adams is a long-term piece. This just isn't a rental, a 2-year deal or whatever. This is a guy that they intend on being around for 6 to 8 years in this defense and probably taking over for Bobby Wagner as the centerpiece and leader of the defense going forward. This guy's a natural leader. He was the leader of the Jets defense. He's going to take a step back to Bobby Wagner, but this guy's total alpha, wants to be a vocal leader of a defense, and he has that in spades. He ran a 4.33 40 at his pro day at LSU before the draft. He was timed at the combine at 4.56, but he's a little faster than that. Ran a 4.13 short shuttle.
He plays the 4.45. If you watch his tape and you see his closing speed, his play speed is not 4.45. It's like 4.3 something. And it's pretty obvious on the tape that this is a guy with elite speed, just period. Not just for a strong safety, but period.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And he plays like a strong safety, his body. He's a big guy. He's a thumper. He plays close to the line of scrimmage. When you take a look at the way that New York used him, which we will not, Greg Williams is much more of a blitz-happy kind of scheme guy. He schemes things open for his players to be able to get to the quarterback and so forth. We're much more of a conservative playing defense, more of kind of in base alignments and so forth. But when you take a look at Adams' snap alignment, he played 324 snaps at linebacker, 124 at edge. He had 6.5 sacks plus 20 pressures from that position in 124 snaps. And then slot, they used him as a slot corner as well, 122 times. He only played strong safety 84 snaps for New York in 2019. Although Seattle looks like they're going to line him up there, it'll be very interesting to me if they move him around as much as they did in New York as far as being kind of that hybrid player. There was a player that Arizona Cardinals drafted this year in the 2020 draft, Isaiah Simmons. Mm-hmm. This is Seattle's Isaiah Simmons. If they so choose to, they could use a player to create mismatches on defense now by moving him all over the place. Now, that's going to disrupt some of your other players and so forth, so you need to be careful of how you do that. Greg Williams didn't care about that. He just wanted Adams all over the place. In Pete Carroll's defense, it's a little bit more structured. They depend on guys being in certain places all the time, and so... Yeah,
but this also gives you the opportunity to
do
a bunch of different things. I mean, you have Marquis Blair on your roster. So, you run out there with 3 safeties. Marquis Blair is a great near the line of scrimmage guy. He's a good blitzer. He's a big hitter. He's actually not bad in coverage. He's more.
We'll see.
He's more like, I mean, okay.
Give him some opportunities.
Even in his college tape, he wasn't great in coverage.
He was the second best coverage safety in the Pac-12. I mean, that's not, everything, but he's not terrible.
He's not terrible. I wasn't trying to say it was terrible. I'm like, but he's not an elite coverage safety. But then again, I mean, McDougald.
But what you're trying to say is they have a lot of scheme diversity.
They've got a lot of scheme diversity. So you run out there with three safeties, and the opposing offensive coordinator looks out there, sees the personnel in the field, and does not know who's lining up where. And you can't make a call to dictate to Seattle what they have to do, because Adams can play everywhere from free safety all the way up to an edge blitzer on any down. And when you've got Marquis Blair there to play strong safety so they can move Adams around, okay. And so basically what you're doing in that situation is you're allowing Adams to be your nickel corner. You're right. And so, but he's not really a nickel corner because you can adjust your scheme and go cover 3 and let him blitz, or you can have him drop out into coverage and play covered and actually drop all the way into cover 2. I mean, you could do anything with a guy like that. And that's going to be a fun toy. I kind of wish that the Seahawks had a defensive coordinator that was more creative, just to take advantage of all of his talents.
We'll see. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'm sure they'll develop a plan. But it'll be very interesting. I wanted to get back to the compensation bit just a little bit because I went to over the cap while we were talking, and I wanted to look at the top 5 safety contracts just in case we do need to franchise him or find out kind of what an extension would look like. Now, for me, Adams has come out and clearly said that he wants to be the top paid safety in the game and get closer to maybe in the top 10 or 15, 20 overall defensive players in the game. And so I wanted to kind of see what that looks like. So the top 5 safety contracts average $14 million bucks, basically. And so that's what a franchise tag would take. And that's cheap when you consider what Adams probably will get in an extension, because it's been reported out there by a couple different sources that an extension would entail closer to an $18 million a year figure, and he would blow out the safety average out of the water, kind of like Khalil Mack did for the defensive line. He would do in the safety group. So now if the Seahawks think that they could get away with $16-17 million on an extension, maybe they do that this offseason. Or they could definitely let him play out. I think his 5th year option salary is close to $10.5 for the 5th year safety at the number 6 overall pick.
I thought it was about 13.
It could be, but I'm thinking it was 10 something.
Yeah. Either way,
anyway,
even let's say it's 13, right? You're like, for the best safety the best strong safety in the game. I still would say Earl Thomas is the best safety in the game, but for the best strong safety in the NFL, 13.5, done, easy. Like that's
so what I'm saying is I think that we've got some flexibility as a team to be able to pay him and keep him for at least the next 3 years, and then we'll see where we're at. Everything changes, everything's going to be completely different by then. We'll get our draft pick, we'll be drafting again, normally. We can franchise tag him, kind of like the Frank Clark deal, and trade him and regain or recoup probably nearly all of that that draft pick capital that we expended to get him, because his value is not going to change in the next 3 or 4 years. He's 24 years old.
That's one of the things that I thought was that when I was looking back at this is, so this is a guy with 3 years in the league going into his 4th year. He's only 24. This isn't a guy that is 28 and you're looking at, okay, well, you've got like a couple of years, and then you start having to wonder, at what point does his body start breaking down? Or this is a young kid. He's 24. He's got 6 to 8 years left of being at the high level that he's at. And this
was a great move by Seattle. You take a look, Keith, at the division, and and what we need to do to stay competitive in our own division. And this is actually the perfect pickup for Seattle. I mean, yeah, you definitely want to spend the money on the defensive line and all that kind of stuff. I get that. And we still could, given the amount of cap that we have. But you do, I agree with Pete Carroll and John Schneider in this respect, is that when you can go out and get a absolute difference maker for your team, a guy that quote unquote tilts the field, a guy that's potentially a leader for your team, a core foundational piece like Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright have been, and Earl Thomas and Russell Wilson. He's that player. You go get him, and you worry about the compensation stuff. But here's the deal with Adams is he's better than anyone they could have drafted in the late first round times 2.
Mm-hmm.
So you take any two late first round picks that Seattle has had over the last 10 years, and you put those on paper and you compare them to Adams, I'll take that deal any time.
Yeah, that was one of the things is if you look at just draft capital, if you were to take 2 picks in the 20s, right, say 22 and 28, would a team take that for the 6th overall pick, which is where Adams was taken? And the answer is no.
Yeah, it would take that and then maybe something else.
Yeah, well, and a 3rd round pick and maybe a 2nd round pick in order to move that far up in the draft to go get a guy. So if you think of it that way, it's already a good deal. Excuse me.
Think of it this way, Keith. Think of it this way: Seattle traded number 8 and number 10 to move up to number 3 in 1990 to pick your favorite player of all time, Cortez Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
So if Seattle does that, and then they go out and get Jamal Adams, and he's a not only a Pro Bowler, but he's an All-Pro and helps you get to the Super Bowl, it's completely worth it. Like, the compensation doesn't matter at that point. He got you to a Super Bowl, and put you in a position to get there multiple years, not just next year, not this year, but multiple years now. I think it's a no-brainer. I mean, to me, yeah, everyone complains about the draft capital, and that's what everybody's going to do. But when you really take a look at the player and the impact that he will have over a long period of time on the defense, it's a no-brainer.
Here's my one last point on this. My one big concern is that at some point they are going to need a franchise left tackle.
That is huge,
and
that is the big sticking point here for me too.
And because Dwayne Brown is getting old, and he's had some injury problems recently, in part because he's getting old, and so they're going to need to replace him, and get a guy that can protect Russell Wilson on that side. And if you look at the people that you and I talked about in the draft for this year, picking near the end of the first round, it was guys that have franchise left tackle potential, but need to play a year or two on the right side in order to hone their game, and really get some polish before they move them over. And
I honestly have a feeling, Keith, that they're going to actually have to go out and get a free agent left tackle,
which is so expensive.
or a trade to do. I know,
Mm-hmm.
but what choice are they going to have? They're not picking in the first round for 3 years. Dwayne Brown this could be his last season.
Mm-hmm.
It might not be. I mean, the best possible scenario for the Seahawks right now is to have Dwayne Brown play out his entire contract and maybe sign up for one more year. The worst case scenario is this is his last year, or he might, gets injured, doesn't finish the season. Seahawks have really thinned out on tackle depth, and they're stuck next year. And they've literally got to go out and solve that problem, likely way before the draft. And the only way to do that is to sign a free agent to a sizable deal, and that's going to have to be the priority next offseason. Yeah. I'm thinking.
And so, this is my concern, right? Because that is a cornerstone position on your defense or on your offense. And they've put themselves in a position where they know a big need is coming, and they don't really have a way to solve it. And
they may have to give up something like Tyler Lockett to do it, which is horrible to think about, but it could happen.
Yep. And so that's my biggest concern is when I look into the future. But the other part of it is if you look at John Snyder's first round picks. Now, granted, he gave away a lot of his first round picks in trades and that kind of stuff. And he also allowed Tom Cable to select who they thought was the best available offensive lineman a couple of times. But you end up with a situation. His first round picks have never, like, Earl Thomas was great. Russell Okung was pretty dang good. Those were both the first year. What's the first round pick situation been like since then? The only other one that's really worked out well for them was Bruce Irvin the following year. And even that one, he didn't get a second contract in Seattle.
And those were all above, picking, 20.
Yeah. Those are all early picks.
First half of the draft, right?
Yep. And so his track record is in finding mid-round talent that develops into
that's why I was really shocked they didn't draft an offensive tackle this year. And that's way before this Adams pick even, or this Adams deal even came into being. Mm-hmm. They didn't address the left tackle of the future situation. They went with Damian Lewis instead at right guard. Obviously tackled that situation. That's fine. But left us kind of out there with nothing on the vines for the future at tackle. So it'll be interesting. Keith, let's get to this year. Let's get to right now. Let's get to training camp. So let's talk the moves that have happened in the last couple of days, and then we'll get to the storylines. Chance Warmack opted out of 2020. We mentioned that. We'll talk about how that impacts the offensive line here in a bit. Quentin Dunbar placed on the NFL exempt list. Keith, we thought this might be a possibility. We just didn't know based on the legalities that he's facing in Florida on this situation. But it turns out this was probably a likely scenario for him all along. He was placed on that list, and now very, very, very unlikely that he will suit up for the Seattle Seahawks. He's on a 1-year deal, basically, and I think that's it.
So just to... for the people who are listening, being on the commissioner's exempt list means they're not eligible to practice. They're not eligible to play. They still get paid. So this isn't a situation where you're like, oh, well, you're, suspending a player and taking away his right to work and any of that. He still gets paid. And he doesn't count against the cap. But it's basically, it was a list put in place in the CBA to give the league some control over its image, and so it was specifically designed for domestic violence cases. So you could take that player who is in the news and having these kind of issues and get him away from the team, off the field, right. But not run into legal problems down the road because you took away their right to work, and so. It takes them, off the team, off the field, out of the spotlight in terms of being them as a player. But they still get paid, and it gives them a chance to, go handle their legal situation. I know you were like, "Oh, this was kind of the natural situation all along." I'm a little surprised that they went here, knowing that with what's going on, he has not been charged.
And is likely not to be able to get any even court dates since March. Florida, or Miami in particular, hasn't had a single court date.
Yeah. And so he's not going to get charged. He's going to, his lawyer and the, police department have had their war on social media and whatnot, both accusing each other of stuff. But ultimately, I mean, he hasn't been charged. He's
in limbo.
The witnesses are
unreliable at best.
Yeah, I mean, you can take either any side on it, whether they were paid off or not. But ultimately, if you are going into a trial here, how are you going to convict a guy when you have no evidence other than unreliable witnesses who've changed their stories multiple times? So,
word is to Baker's filed an appeal and that Quentin Dunbar is likely right behind him. And the new CBA allows them to have a hearing fairly quickly. So we'll probably hear a final word within a week on this.
Yep.
Yeah, I just think that it's an unfortunate situation. It shows you that mom and dad were correct when they told you to surround yourself with good quality people as you grow up, and you won't hopefully get involved in certain situations that put your entire career in jeopardy. Even if you didn't do anything wrong, sometimes you're hanging out with the wrong sort of folks, and these sorts of things happen. It is what it is. But what it does to the roster, though, is it takes away a starter, a clear starter at the corner position, and it restores Trey Flowers into that starting role again, Keith. And it also leaves 79 players on the roster, and we'll talk about the other cuts in a half second here. Well, let's save the secondary for the later on in the conversation a little bit. Okay. Let's go with the other cuts. They cut 9 players, 2 of which we have heard about. Joey Hunt at center. I had him off my initial roster when we did the roster prediction show a couple weeks ago. You kind of had him on there.
I had him off.
And they did you? Oh, okay.
Yep.
They decided to cut him, and which points to kind of a Posick backup at center option, which is interesting for me. And then Brandon Jackson, which we both thought would be off the roster at defensive end.
Mm-hmm. His spot was gone. I mean, they signed Mayoa. They drafted 2 guys. You've got Bruce Irvin, who's also been added to the rotation there because he's going to get some snaps at end. You've got, you're talking about a player who did not make an impact in 2 years. I know he was a former first-round pick.
He was a placeholder,
but he was just a guy that when an actual impactful player needed a few plays on the sidelines, they'd send him in and hope that the team didn't run over him. I mean, he was just a guy.
Yeah, and he's not worth any further conversation.
Mm-hmm.
The other guys on the list were Patrick Carr, running back, wide receiver Seth Dawkins, Khalil McKenzie, guard, Josh Norwood, defensive back. Jordan Roos was on there at guard, hung around the team practice squad and the active roster for a while as a reserve. Linebacker Sutton Smith, and tight end Dominic Wood Anderson, which I actually thought would have an opportunity maybe to at least stick on a practice squad. Maybe that's still an option out there. These are difficult times. The teams obviously hasn't had a chance to see most of these guys, on the field to be able to properly evaluate them. So just because they're cut now, though, does not mean that they won't be invited back as different cuts and so forth happen during training camp as they pare down the roster to the final roster. So
yep.
Without further ado, why don't we get to our storylines before this thing just lasts for like 3 hours?
You mean like a normal show?
Exactly. So I'm going to do mine in reverse order.
Okay.
Storylines. I'll do one. You can do one. Offensive line starters and key reserves to me is the storyline. The continuity was a big deal for Pete Carroll in the offseason. Turns out that's not going to happen. The team is looking at least 3 new starters this year and possibly 4, depending on if Upati makes it or not. So for me, I've got the starters right now as Brown, Upati, Finney, Lewis, and Shell. The big question mark there is obviously Lewis. Can Lewis come in and really be the big deal there? They're counting on him to be the starter, especially after Womack now is off the roster. And then Phil Haynes at left guard challenging Mike Upati there. Mike Upati's got a small contract. It's not really guaranteed. I think there's a little bit of guarantee money in there, but not a lot. And so I expect Haynes to actually, come in there and take that spot. There's a few other guys, Jamarco Jones, Simmons is there. Posick, we talked about, is possibly being that backup center. Finney looks like he's got that job. To me, that's kind of one of the storylines I'm watching is how does that offensive line come together, especially since there's much less time for the whole thing to kind of gel before the regular season kickoff compared to most years.
Yeah, and I had that on my list too. I mean, this is a big one because the offense is kind of loaded with talent everywhere but the line. The line has potential, but it also has potential to just be terrible. And so it's a big deal. It really will help make or break the offense, and how efficient it is and how good it is and what the ceiling is going to be based on the line there. And so the lack of depth, especially the lack of depth at tackle, is really concerning. And I wouldn't say that they're done. I mean, this is one of those things where they're going to be watching for salary cap casualties. They're going to go look at the 320 players around the league that were just cut, and try and see, are there pieces out there that can help add some depth, because the depth on the line is not great this year.
Yeah, right now we have Jamarco Jones and Cedric Abouye as being the backup tackles, at least on my list. And, Abouye is probably going to fill that George Fant thing when they need an extra lineman. He could probably play both sides. Jamarco Jones
is better off at guard.
He's better off at guard, but better off, if he's going to have to play tackle at right tackle, even though he's smaller on the smaller side. But normally a smaller size tackle is going to be on the left side, but his feet are slow. So what are you going to do with Jamarco Jones?
Play him at guard where he was very good instead of at tackle where he wasn't.
Yeah, well, if they do that, they're really low on tackles. You've got Chad Wheeler and Tommy Champion, undrafted free agent, as your other options.
I know, which is not good options. The line is a big deal. I mean, that is one where I think that you have to really pay attention to. You said it was number 5 on yours, and I actually had it up at number 2. So, but then again, me, offensive line, right? It's kind of my thing.
I actually wrote these out in reverse order on a first draft, so I didn't even really pay too much thought into the order. I just did the order for the show. All right, go ahead. What's your 5th or 4th or however you want to present them?
So I couldn't decide if this was number 5 or number 1, but I was just going to say the COVID-19 situation and who tests positive, when, how is it handled? Do we have issues? I mean, you look at what happened with the Florida Marlins and Major League Baseball, where pretty much every team took it seriously, but Florida, of course, it was Florida.
They had 14 players and coaches test positive over the weekend, and they had an additional 5 players this morning.
Yeah, and then they also played a game, and they played a game
after they knew that they were sick.
Yeah, they let players who had tested positive go play a game, and didn't tell the other team, didn't tell the league, waited till after the game to report it.
What? I don't even get that.
I mean,
I honestly do not get.
It's just full on Florida.
Somebody could be so selfish to be able to do that, to not only to their own players and their own team, but to another team as well.
Well, look at what Florida as a state has done during the COVID-19 pandemic the whole time, right? They refused to shut down. They refused to do anything. They have been this balloon of virus from the early goings after, once New York settled down. Florida's kind of been the hotbed, and it's never gone down because the leaders there don't take it seriously. The people there don't take it seriously. Nobody seems to care. And it's just going crazy. And I don't want to say that the sports team follows the state as, like that, but I do think that when everyone in a community has a certain attitude about it,
it's hard to change behavior.
You're expecting other people that live in that community to have a completely different attitude about it. And I don't think that's ever going to happen. And so you end up with a situation where that team is a problem. So they had to cancel opening day and push everything back. And honestly, I think they should start playing games, and Florida needs to take a loss for every game that they can't play because they don't have a team. And maybe then they'll take it seriously.
I think it's definitely going to impact the NFL this year, Keith. And I think that the Major League Baseball thing is kind of indicative of what can happen. You've got 32 teams. You've got a whole bunch of young guys. and you're not going to be in a bubble situation. And so you're going to be in 32 different cities, 32 different attitudes about how the team conducts itself and so forth. It's going to be a major challenge, and we'll see how far we can get. I think the fact that if you go through 17 weeks of football, including a bye, and you get to a Super Bowl, so you're out an additional 3 or 4 weeks there at the end, I put the chances of that actually happening all the way through without canceling any games at less than 5%. It's going to be a major, major challenge, and this storyline is going to impact not only training camp, but it's going to impact the regular season more than we can possibly predict at this point.
Yeah, and that's why I said I couldn't decide if this was the number one story of the 2020 season, because it's going to be such a thing that's going to carry
The only
through.
reason I left it off my list is because we were going to talk about it up front, and I thought I'd try to stick to football on the storylines. But I totally agree with you. I was going to put that on. It was definitely part of my thinking.
So, okay, what's your next one?
Where will KJ Wright and Jordan Brooks end up out of camp? So when they get to the regular season, Pete has signaled that it's the strong side linebacker role for KJ Wright moving forward, and the weak side would be Jordan Brooks to lose.
Which is
he wants
interesting.
Jordan Brooks to come in and compete in camp and find out where it all kind of lands.
So
but that's the indication.
So you're basically what he's saying is he is displacing KJ Wright from day one.
Sounds like it.
And taking over KJ Wright's spot at the weak side linebacker and letting KJ Wright become the strong side linebacker. But the strong side linebacker is also home to a Mr. Bruce Irvin.
Right. It's interesting, Keith, that you say that, because so in the offseason now, these coaches haven't had any chance at all to see all these players together on the field, but Pete Carroll's a very smart man. He's seen KJ Wright for 8-9 years. He's seen Bruce Irvin in action. He knows how these puzzle pieces should fit and how he wants them to fit. And so for him to come out and declare, I want to see KJ at strong side, he can probably see the writing on the wall about KJ. He understands that he wants to get his best players out on the field. So to split time with Irvin and KJ over there on the right side, strong side of that defense, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it because Irvin's going to move around a little bit. He's got the opportunity to rush the passer. KJ over there gives him a little bit more time, allows him to play out his contract anyway, and gives Brooks the best chance to come in and be on the field full time right away to take advantage of his team speed and his playmaking ability. So I do think that this is probably the way it's going to go. My question, though, is after that, what does happen to Irvin and Barton in particular? Because Barton showed out last year, deserves a little bit more opportunity to play, to have playing time.
And Barton is a natural off-the-line linebacker. He is a little undersized, very quick, very fast, needs to be he played middle linebacker some in college, but he's more of a weak side linebacker himself.
But the Seahawks went out and picked Brooks. So now what do you do?
Well, Brooks was a middle linebacker his senior year and played outside linebacker before that.
I do believe he's more of a natural outside linebacker in the NFL.
I think he can move around and play, all three spots and do them effectively. Whereas Barton, I think he played strong side linebacker last year, but it was pretty clear that he was playing out of position and is more natural off the line. So I think that what you've got in him is a player that you can move around, you can plug in places, you can account for injuries and that kind of stuff. But okay, sure, you've got Bobby Wagner, who's an All-Pro. He's not going anywhere. And then
and you've got Adams that is coming in that has taken serious snaps at the linebacker position for New York.
Mm-hmm.
That does provide you with an opportunity to have a hybrid kind of look here, where you can disguise coverages and schemes a little bit. You can blitz Adams, you can blitz Wright, you can blitz Bobby, Jordan, Brooks. All those guys have the ability to get to the quarterback on a different type of scheme looks.
Mm-hmm. So I think that this is
It's a nice problem to have, Keith.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, as far as the Barton depth in particular, and Irvin as well.
So this, you jumped straight into what I thought was the number one storyline going in, because you still have the potential of seeing KJ Wright not on this roster and saving over $10 million in cap room, because you've got Brooks.
I would have thought it would have been more likely to happen if Dunbar was still on the team, because that gave him a little bit more, really a lot more flexibility in the secondary, and we'll talk about that in a second. But with Adams being such a unique talent, he's got the ability to play in every situation that KJ Wright has the ability to play in. As well as being this, and if you could get KJ Wright off the field, whatever. I love KJ, but let's just talk about him not being on the field. If you get KJ Wright off the field and you kind of have Adams back there moving around, he's playing strong side linebacker, he's playing strong safety. You've got Blair to be able to come in and so forth. That just gives you so many opportunities for matchups against different offenses and different players and so forth. When you're replacing Wright, and you've got players out there that at this point in their careers have more upside.
Well, you look at going from last year to this next year, and you talk about removing McDougald, KJ Wright, and Kendricks off the field and replacing them with Adams, Brooks, and Blair, because let's say Adams, gets most of the playing stop, either with the slot and all that kind of stuff. That three, and then you go, well, what did that do to your team speed? And it's like, it massively improved your overall team speed. Yes. And that was one of the things that we knew going into the offseason. The defensive team speed had to get better. And
you put Diggs out there for more than 5 games.
Yeah, and so you've gone and you've created a lot more team speed, a lot more flexibility. And I'm not trying to slight KJ, but you could tell even last year, which was a rebound year for him, and he played pretty well, that knee has slowed him down. He is not, he was never like super fast, but his brain keeps him on the field. Yeah. Not his athletic ability anymore. He's certainly more athletic than a lot of players, but nonetheless, at this point in his career, it's his brain that keeps him active. Because he's still one of the best in the NFL at recognizing a screen, reading it, getting up and making a tackle as soon as all of that. Like he's just amazing at that, and that's awesome. And you replace that with a rookie, and you're asking for teams to throw a lot of screens at you. But at the same time, his lack of speed hurt the defense. There were times when you could just tell he could not make a play because he couldn't get there. And so is the KJ watch your number one? Yeah, that was off-season look. That was my training camp. It's just because you have all these players, and I'm not suggesting that they have to cut KJ or anything. I love KJ Wright. I want him to be on the team. I do too. But, me too. But to me, how this breaks down when you've got 7 guys competing for 3 spots worth of playing time. And you add Adams in there that can play that he's one of my 7. But I'm looking at this and I'm like, that is, and of the 7 guys, all of them are good. There's no like, we're mentioning, there's this guy that might make the roster or whatnot. No, these are good players. These are starter caliber players. And you got 7 competing for 3 spots. And to me, when you're looking at training camp and there's no preseason, but roster battles and that kind of stuff, that is intriguing. That is going to be fun to watch day in, day out, how that shakes out. And that's why that was my top, my top one. That I love. This is going to be fun. Well, this is likely my top one for a lot of fun reasons. Is the new look Seahawks secondary. You got Diggs, Amati, Flowers, Griffin, Dunbar. Oops, sorry, scratch that one out. I wrote this before Dunbar was sequestered.
Blair, Adams, Hill, and then you've got all the young guys, Brian Allen, Ryan Neal, Gavin Hellsop, Debone Renfro, all those type of guys, Lindell Stevens, Jason Stanley we talked about. This is going to be so much fun to watch in I was going to say preseason, in camp. I wish there were some games that we could really take a look and see how all this is going to fit together before the actual, opening day kickoff. That's crazy. But the secondary has now, you take Dunbar out of there, it's still got way more talent overall than it had last year, and it has a lot more upside. I really do believe that Nico Thorpe might be on the bubble this year at a special teams specialist, but he's not really a guy that you're going to put out on the field there at corner. I think maybe they take a look at a guy that can also give you some special teams upside, but also develop as being in the secondary. Now that Dunbar's not here and you got a guy like Griffin on a contract year, they might take a look at having an outside corner develop on the roster this year. And that's why I think Nico Thorpe's job might be in jeopardy from a guy like Brian Allen or Ryan Neal, guy with the size, length, speed that can come in and really compete for that. And then I just want to see the dynamic that the Seahawks have at nickel and in dime coverages. How are they going to use Adams in the secondary versus being really up close to the line of scrimmage? How are they going to use Blair this year? Is he actually going to be a slot guy, or is he going to be a free safety? And are they going to let him roam around all over the place and make plays? He's a playmaker. You got to get that guy on the field somehow. How are they going to use him? How is he going to fit? How's Flowers going to do with the upside that Adams brings, just alone Adams, and then you add Diggs for a full season? How does that change Flowers as far as being a man cover corner, a guy that can to make plays on the ball, a guy that feels comfortable making plays this year as opposed to worrying about how the safeties are covering guys behind him last year? I just think it really makes a difference. And then if we can increase that pass rush win rate this year with all of the diversity we've got on the defensive line, how is that going to impact cornerback play? And now Flowers, by fate of Dunbar not being on this roster, gets another opportunity to really show his own development as well as the team development that allows his growth. I think is going to be a huge story to watch.
Yeah, and it's going to be a lot of fun. I mean, that is a fun group. This is one of the better secondaries in the NFL. The reason why I didn't have it on my list is because I think your starters are set, right? You know who your free safety is. You know who your strong safety is. You know who both your corners are. You know that Amadi and Blair are going to get on the field in sub-package situations. And
nickel and dime.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's sort of it. And so
that's sort of it.
Well, you know
to
what
me,
I mean?
that's really fun and intriguing.
Oh, it's fun. It's intriguing. It's a lot of talent, but this is, this is training camp and leading up to this season and roster battles and who's going to make the squad and who's going to win that starting job. And I think you got all the starters set and it's an elite group, but that doesn't make it as
but you have to admit that the whole Blair and Adams storylines alone put this on the list. I mean, that to me, now I get what you just said, obviously, but to me, the story is so big. Adams is going to occupy a lot of headline space out of camp this year.
Yeah. So we can look at my number 3 overall, which is the defensive line. Because
I had that number 1.
Yep. I put it number 3 because I think that really I thought the human factor of it being the KJ watch, and the fact that he's such a loved player makes that intriguing because are we watching the last few practices of KJ as a Seahawk? Can he win? Right? So I to me, there was just a personal level to that one, so I put it up. And the defensive line I've got sitting at 3 because how does it shake out? You know who your two starters at defensive tackle are. You kind of got an idea. You kind of know who your two starters at defensive end are, but you've got a couple of rookies that both want to get in there and compete. You got Collier. Can't he show enough to show that he deserves a spot on a rotation? Do they use some of the cap room that they've got now that they've cut a bunch of people to go bring Clowney back into the mix? Who do they go get in terms of a defensive tackle because they desperately need one? There is nothing really settled. The defensive line is kind of the opposite of the secondary. It's not settled. We don't know what the rotations are going to look like. We don't even know which players are going to make the team for the most part. Anything could happen. You could get new players brought in that will be maybe even starters or significant contributors. There's just so much that can change. And to me, I'm looking at that and I'm like, that's going to be interesting. I just don't see the personal connection that I have to the linebacker group because we're not looking at, KJ Wright. So.
Yeah, you pretty much wrote my script for this for the defensive line. I mean, as far as the unknowns, is Collier going to develop? How's Green going to do? How are Mayoa and Irvin going to impact the line? The defensive tackle group is set up front, but there's no real depth there. How's that going to play out? Who are they going to add? Is it going to be a defensive end? Is it going to be a defensive tackle? Is it going to be both? Will they just go into the season as is, which would be perplexing to me, but not completely unexpected given the COVID-19 situation. So yeah, to me, this is a big unit, and it kind of ties into my next big storyline is how do the rookies fit in? Darrell Taylor and Alton Robinson are going to be a big part of that defensive line rotation at defensive end, specifically at the Leo spot. And how do they work with Mayoa to create pressure? That's going to be a big thing. I don't think you're going to actually answer that during training camp. I don't think you're going to be able to answer how the defensive line is really doing until 3, 4, 5 games into the regular season, which is kind of crazy, but here we are. So my next segment is how will the rookies fit in? Jordan Brooks, Darrell Taylor, Damian Lewis. Those guys all are going to be either starting or key rotational pieces. Then you've got DJ Dallas. How does he impact that running back game for the Seahawks? Alton Robinson, is he going to show this year, or is he just going to be a guy that doesn't see the field a lot because Mayoa and Taylor kind of occupy all the snaps? Colby Parkinson, is he a guy that's going to avoid that PUP list right off the bat? Is he going to be healed enough to be able to have any time at all before the first regular season game? Freddie Swain, is he going to make the roster? Are the Seahawks looking at him to solve their kick return game? He's very dynamic, and I'm really interested to see if he shows up at camp and really sets himself apart in that respect. And Stephon Sullivan as well. Is this kid, can they protect him on the practice squad, or is he going to show up so much in camp that they won't be able to keep him off the roster? So to me, looking at all the rookies is really exciting to me. And that's not even counting Anthony Gordon, undrafted rookie free agent. I think he's going to have an impact on the roster, but he won't have as big as an impact as he would have had there been preseason games. Well, now that there's no preseason games, he's not going to be able to get any reps in actual games to see if he can actually do it on the field. That alone means that he's not going to make the 55 or whatever it is, and he's going to be on the practice
I will
squad.
say this, that the lack of preseason games means that getting guys through waivers and onto the practice squad is going to be much easier this year than in other years, because there's no people that have come in and shown out in a way where the other 31 teams all see and they're like, whoa, this kid might be able to do something. And then when he gets cut, they go, let's give him a chance and go get him. You're going to be able to get guys through waivers because Anthony Gordon went undrafted. There's a reason why he went
I wonder
undrafted.
if there's going to be kind of an unwritten rule, between all teams.
No,
that
there won't be.
Picking off players off practice squads and so forth might not be the thing it has been in the past.
No, I think that teams are competitive. They'll do whatever they can to win, and it won't be that. And the other thing is the players and the league and the NFLPA, they want guys that are on practice squads to get onto rosters, and they don't care if it's with another team, because that means you've taken a guy, you've developed him a little bit, you're giving him a chance to get on a roster, show that they can play. It's about player development. It's about league competitiveness. There's no downside to these guys moving around because they're not even on the roster. They're not even there to help your team. They're there to practice and learn and be the scout team.
So what is the final roster count, Keith? Is it 53 this year or is it 55?
I think it's 53.
Yeah, I thought so.
We want 55 was out there. It was on the table, but I don't believe that ever got adopted.
You're right.
So I'm pretty sure it's 53, but 55 is still out there as an option. I don't think it's going to happen this year. It might. They might come through and rule and say, hey, let's go 55. But the fact that they increased the practice squads from 10 to 16, I think says expanding the rosters further as far as active roster isn't going to happen.
It'd be nice to have that third quarterback because the Seahawks just came out yesterday and said that Geno Smith and Russell Wilson will not be in the same room together this year. It's kind of like the president and the vice president as far as being together at any events and so forth. They're very careful about that. They keep them separate just in case. Mm-hmm. That's the same thing with this. It's like COVID-19 protection for your team. We're going to make sure our quarterbacks, we have at least one that can go every week.
Yeah, and it's smart. I mean, just you keep those two guys away from each other, and because you don't want one to get it and them to give it to the other one, because now you're at your top two quarterbacks, and then what do you do? Your season's over.
Yep.
And so you're just gonna do that. The only thing that I've got that we haven't talked about yet, and to me it's all the way down at number 4 on my list, and that's the running back group, because you've got a lot of injury-prone guys with a tremendous amount of talent and a rookie that no one's talking about and a lot of people don't know much about, and that's it. Because we know Chris Carson is an amazing player, but he's never made it through a season without getting injured, college or pro. Carlos Hyde is statistically, in terms of all the different ways you can measure a running back, right there with Chris Carson, but he's not considered a star in the league because he is injured a lot. You've got Penny, who really came on last year and showed that he could be a difference maker in this offense, but he blew out his knee and probably won't be ready to play until around midseason. And you've got some other guys like Travis Homer, who looked like he could play out, receive out of the backfield, but you don't want him running between the tackles. And so that's it. He's not really a scheme fit. And then you've got DJ Dallas, who has a tremendous amount of talent, but wasn't really on most people's radar, wasn't on our radar due to some injuries and stuff his senior year and just a little bit lack of production. But when you go back and when you look at his tape,
behind a very poor offensive line, too.
Yes. And then you go look at his tape, and when you get, the offensive line was bad. And you know what he did? He made people miss in the backfield in order to get positive yards. He bounced off contact and didn't go down easy. He fell forward a lot.
Yes.
He showed some nice power and explosiveness and a lot of these things that make Chris Carson good. And maybe he should have been on our radar.
I actually, you were on him right after the draft as being very high on him, very positive, and I was kind of lukewarm, if even that. And so, based on your talking to me about it, I did go back and rewatched. He's got like a 15-minute highlight thing out there and another 8-minute one. And I watched those just to see what I could see in the player, and I'm coming closer to where you're at.
Yeah.
I think he's definitely got some upside there. He's definitely a guy that's a more well-rounded player than Travis Homer. Absolutely. Travis Homer showed last year, you're right. He's a receiving out of the backfield kind of guy. kind of a fourth option, but you really needed that third option. And DJ Dallas gives you that. So if Penny's out, we've got DJ to take those handoffs. Now, when Penny comes back and you've got Carson, Penny, and Hyde, and they're all healthy, I think that DJ Dallas takes a step back. But next year, with Hyde off the roster, Chris Carson's in a contract year, Penny's, supposedly maybe healthy next year. At least you've got DJ Dallas there with a little bit of game experience, and next year maybe he takes full control of his opportunity. But we'll see what happens this year. As you said, anything can happen in the running back room, especially with the injury history and so forth. Mm-hmm. DJ Dallas could be the unsung hero by the time it's all said and done.
Well, yeah. I mean, you look at the way it all worked out. Really the last Marshawn year when Thomas Rawls was the guy for a big chunk of it, and looked surprisingly good, and then he just never really returned from his ankle injury. And then, when Chris Carson came on his rookie year, that was unexpected. He was not expected to be a big contributor, but all the guys above him on the roster flamed out and did not have any explosiveness whatsoever, and he seized that opportunity. I mean, you're talking about, okay, when Penny comes back, what if all the guys are healthy? What are the chances of that? You look at Carson and Hyde's track record. What are the chances that all three guys are healthy at once? I don't know if that's really that high.
That's interesting, but I tell you what, I am looking forward to Carlos Hyde, maybe more so than some. I do believe that he's a very underrated signing for this team this year, and has the potential to have a very serious impact. I mean, more so than maybe even Penny had on the roster so far as Chris Carson and Carlos Hyde could actually share the load if that's what it came to. Say Chris Carson had a fumbling problem again this year, I wouldn't have any problem at all putting Carlos Hyde in there as the number one back. I think they're that close.
They're really the same player. You go and look at elusiveness rating, how many broken tackles, yards after contact per play, all those things, and they line up like Carson's 3, Hyde's 4. Or Carson's 5 and Hyde's 7. I mean, they're right there together on pretty much all of these more advanced stats. Yeah. And to me, that's why I like the signing, is because you saw what happened to the offense when Chris Carson gets hurt the last couple of years. All of a sudden, the offense doesn't work as well. And okay, so now Chris Carson gets hurt, and you stick Hyde in there, and you keep rolling because you've got, you cloned Chris Carson, and you've got his clone ready to go. And so I'm with you as far as really liking that signing. But I want to see how this all works out, because you've also got a couple of undrafted guys there that I think, I don't think you just write off and be like, no, they're just bodies, because I mean, Carson was a 7th round pick that no one expected anything from, but the Seahawks go and they find guys with particular traits. They like a certain trait, and then they go, can you build around that trait and turn into a good player around that? And those guys have that too, which makes them have a chance to come in and pull a Chris Carson and shine, or pull a Thomas Rawls his rookie year and shine. And so you've got a situation where I just want to see how this shakes out. I mean, it's very possible that we go into the season and one of Carson or Hyde didn't even make it through training camp without injury, because they're injury-prone guys. And so, and Penny's still on the PUP list. So now what do you do? To me, it's a very interesting position group to watch. I have no idea how it's going to shake out, because there's so many variables and so many unknowns.
Couple of things that didn't make my list but are right there for me is how the wide receiver group comes together. Mm-hmm. The other one is how does Greg Olson and Will Disley perform? Does Greg Olson still have that top end ability? Mm-hmm. He talks a good game. I'm telling you, when you listen to him talk this offseason, he's like, I plan on competing to be like the number one tight end in the NFL. I'm going to come in and help this team. I'm not washed out at all. I'm ready to compete at the highest level that I've ever competed at. If that is true, oh my goodness, because you put Greg Olson in this offense as working with Russell Wilson, and you take Will Disley, and you look at what Will Disley's done the last couple of years, right, when he's been healthy, and you kind of give that to Greg Olson. Greg Olson has that ability. And so if that's in the offense this year, my goodness. And then you add Disley. If Disley's healthy, that tandem right there could pay huge dividends down the road.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. Like the tight end group was just off my list. The wide receiver group was just off my list.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you've got it's going to be a fun. I really wish there was the 2 preseason games that there was because I want to watch these guys play and really get a feel.
I think everybody wants to watch football, man.
But at the same time, I do think it was the right decision to not, because you don't need. It's not about contact or injury or that kind of stuff. It's about guys sweating and breathing on each other for a game when you're trying to keep the number of, the number of COVID cases down. So,
yeah, Keith, if there's one thing about 2020 is that it's teaching everybody to have a little bit of patience on a number of different issues. You're asked whether you like it or not to be patient and to allow things to work and things will work out in the end and all that kind of stuff. It is being very much tested this year, and this is one of those situations where we're going to just have to, we're going to keep recording and putting out shows for the next even 2 weeks. We're really not going to have much to talk about. I mean, the coaches are going to come out and make a few statements now and again. Yeah, they look good, reading their playbook, and the meetings are going very well, and everyone's trying to stay healthy. COVID-19, is not going to get into our meeting rooms. Everything is going to be talked about except for actual football on the field, which is going to be a little frustrating. But once this thing gets started,
I agree. I agree with that for next week, because everyone's coming into this quarantine situation. I believe the week after we're going to start seeing some players on the field that practice, and they're not going to be. There's no hitting. They're not going to be wearing pads. It's.
Let me ask you this, Keith: do you know, or have you heard about how teams are approaching allowing filming and reporters and so forth to cover the team this year, and COVID-19?
So obviously, like, the fans aren't going to be allowed to go like they have in the
Correct.
past. But I am under the impression that a lot of that stuff's going to happen as in previous years, except for they're going to keep all of the press people and the cameras back further away from the players so that they're not entering the players' bubble. And they're not being given access to go talk to them and have that issue. But as long as you're back far enough and you socially distance and stay away from the team, that you can be there on the sideline and be watching and reporting and that kind of stuff.
Well, that'll be good. Wow. Talk about a packed show. I mean, we just talked about issue after issue. It was crazy. It's actually one of my funnest shows to do this offseason because we finally had some things to talk about as far as some players and some stories, and the big Jamal Adams thing. My goodness, I don't even think that we've actually fully comprehended the impact that this is going to have on the team.
Honestly, if this had happened in June or just after the draft or that kind of stuff, we would have committed an entire show to that trade and his impact and the different things he does. And now we're up against the start of training camp, so we fit it in as just a segment, but it's such a big deal. It really is. And I don't know if people realize just the type of dynamic player he is. And it's at such a premium position in Seattle. And I know there's a lot of talk out there about, why do you pay so much for a safety? Like, you do that for a left tackle or a quarterback.
That's why.
But you're right. He's not just a safety. And in Seattle's scheme, safeties are more valuable than they are in other schemes. You have to have great safety play to make this work. And last year proved it.
He will become, in time, if not this year, very soon, he will become just as valuable to the defense as Bobby Wagner. And that's a big statement.
That is a huge statement.
But think about it.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you. It is definitely possible. I mean, Bobby Wagner is getting older. His time in Seattle will not be forever, no matter how much we want it to be. I see him he's probably got 3-4 years left in him. But when he's done in Seattle,
I mean, think about Earl Thomas before Earl Thomas left. Before Earl Thomas started getting injured, Earl Thomas was the man.
Oh yeah.
Bobby Wagner took over from Earl Thomas.
Kind of.
So,
well, actually, if you actually talk to the players and or listen to the players,
that's true.
And
That's true.
Bobby Wagner has kind of been the guy from
Earl Thomas
from his rookie
was the tone
year.
Setter along with Chancellor, but Earl Thomas was
Cam Chancellor was the true leader. He was the guy that players looked to. He was the guy that when Sherman was having his meltdowns on the sidelines, it was Cam Chancellor who was over there talking him off the ledge and getting him focused. He was the leader.
I wonder if there'll be any moments this year because, Bobby Wagner's somewhat vocal in the meeting rooms and so forth, but out on the field, he's kind of taken on a little bit of that role. But he's not the most vocal guy. And Adams is a talker. I mean, he's a yapper on the field and putting guys in position and yelling at guys if they make a mistake. And it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic works this year.
I don't think it's going to be a problem because you look at the Jets and they didn't have anyone else on defense that could have been that leader. They looked at him as, you've got to be the guy. You're the only franchise level player on this defense. Yeah. Whereas with Bobby, now he's got help. He's got someone who's there, but Bobby's also worked with Earl Thomas, who was a vocal leader. He worked with Cam Chancellor, who was, basically like the big brother of everyone on that defense. He worked with Richard Sherman, who was overly vocal and demonstrative and all those things, and excelled around those guys and found ways to help all of those guys reach their potential too. And I think that, you look at Adams is kind of Sherman-like in ways, and he's Cam Chancellor-like in ways when you talk about his leadership and on the field intangibles. Those aren't things that Bobby Wagner hasn't worked with. And sure, it might be their personality, and maybe Adams doesn't want to listen to, Wagner and all those kind of things, but I don't see that happening. You don't look at a multi-time All-Pro guy who's considered the best linebacker in the game. And
I'm sure there's going to be some deference given there from Adams.
And just write him off. You know what I mean?
Right.
You're a 24-year-old guy coming off a great season where he was also named All-Pro. But you're talking about a guy that's been in the league, who's been either the best or the top two behind, with Luke Kuechly also in consideration at his position for 8 years. There is you can't just go in there and be like, oh, well, this is my team now, and you're going to have to sit down, Mr. multi-year All-Pro. This is not going to happen.
Right. No, this is definitely Bobby Wagner's defense, and I'm sure Jamal Adams realizes that too. And you know what? In the end, it's the play on the field that's going to dictate terms on this defense, and both those guys can show up and play, and there's room for both those guys.
Always.
And we needed Adams. I mean, this defense, when you take a look at it, like getting to the next level. Now, Dunbar would have helped, and it kind of is upsetting that he's not going to be available and so forth. It would have just made the defense even better, but we're still really good, especially with Adams now. And you take a look at the NFC West and competing specifically with the 49ers and now the Arizona Cardinals up and coming. The Adams piece to me is like a really, really solid foundational piece of the puzzle. And maybe they're one player away right now from getting that NFC West crown and getting to the Super Bowl. And I think if they can somehow or another find a way to sign Jadeveon Clowney or get the best remaining defensive tackle that's out there on the market. I think that, or even two pieces, whatever. If that happens, I think that it just takes this whole thing to the next level, and we're really seriously talking about being there at the end.
Yeah. That wraps it up and summarizes it greatly. That's well done, Bill.
Thank you very much. All right, so I have no idea where we go from here, Keith. We don't have anything written down on our schedule for upcoming podcasts. We went through our 5-week schedule we did 5 weeks ago, and now we need to kind of start again. Obviously, we're going to be talking about training camp and players and what's coming up and any storylines that have emerged over the last week. That'll be in the next show, and we'll just go from there. Anything else final to add before we head out of here, Keith?
Nope. I'm just ready for practice. Let's get out there.
We're finally here.
I know.
It's finally happening.
It's been a long COVID-filled off season, and I am ready for football. And please, oh please, every player in the NFL, please take COVID seriously so we don't have a Major League Baseball situation. Please, please.
Absolutely. All right. Follow Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at NW Seahawks. The show is at Hawks Playbook on Twitter. SeahawksPlaybook.com has all of the shows on the website, and you can subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app and make sure you don't miss it because we're here every week. So until next time, Keith, go Hawks. Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk. Keith is at Myers NFL. The show is at Hawks Playbook. And you can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.